Because capturing the interest of an audience is so important, sometimes video game developers sell their project on a new mechanic you may never have seen or heard of before. Sometimes these mechanics turn out to not be necessarily as good as you were hoping they might be, however. I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 overhyped game mechanics that were a complete disappointment. Number 10, Realistic Interrogations, LA Noire. LA Noire is one of the more ambitious Rockstar projects when it comes to innovation. The game's goal was to create a realistic 1940s detective experience by making the witnesses and suspects express the most subtle emotions on their faces with the latest motion capture technologies. And by latest, that was the standards of 2011, which is probably why this revolutionary feature ended up looking more comical than immersive. Instead of serving as a window into the suspect's psyche, however, the expressions your character's interviewees made were either stupidly easy to read or so grotesquely contorted that you had to double check you were still talking to a human being and not some kind of malfunctioning shapeshifter. You can't deny LA Noire's ambition, but its core mechanics simply aren't as impressive as its developers anticipated. It makes for an entertaining spectacle in the vein of a circus show, but if you're looking for a proper interrogator simulator, you unfortunately need to search for it elsewhere. At least Detective Elf's drawings looked really good. That was something. Number 9, Hacking, Watch Dogs. As far as Ubisoft's franchises go, Watch Dogs is one of the most controversial. The series has a very vocal group of haters online, and most people will agree that its first installment is not nearly as impressive as the trailers made it out to be. The core element of Watch Dogs gameplay is hacking. You play as a rogue hacker who's capable of jacking into things like people's phones and even Chicago's entire traffic control system. The 2013 trailers for the game made the hacking look as though it would make your character a digital god, capable of turning off electronic devices in the entire city with one click of a button and sowing wireless chaos wherever he went. However, when excited players finally got their hands on Watch Dogs, the reality definitely didn't match the expectation. Not only were the hacking mechanics not nearly as cinematic and advanced as their trailer counterparts, but the game was also filled with bugs, which made even the most impressive of your abilities, like stopping and controlling cars, look like an absolute joke. Maybe the developer should have learned how to fix software problems before trying to emulate the hackers who create them. Number 8, Create Your Own Character, Sonic Forces. In terms of Sega's worst, Sonic Forces is definitely up there. After years of mediocre Sonic games, it's hard to get too excited about the next one without adding a caveat of, unless they screw it up again. Forces manages to do very little to make a case against the argument that 3D Sonic had gotten stale to the point of soullessness. The greatest testament to this is the most overhyped feature of the game, the character creator. The 2017 announcements for Forces were proudly boasting about the title allowing the player to create their very own Sonic the Hedgehog character, basically fulfilling the dreams of every Sonic fan out there. However, the character creator in the game is done in such a lazy and lackluster way that even the most hardcore Sega fan can't get anything out of it. The game limits you to only one body type, a small handful of animal species to pick from, and then a pitiful selection of clothes that look like a poor college freshman's wardrobe. Even when you try to recreate already existing characters with the creator like Sonic or Shadow, your creations end up looking like cheap knockoffs. It's actually a pretty good summary of how this character creator feels when compared to most other modern creators. Speaking of which, number 7, Character Creation, Cyberpunk 2077. Give this video a like and a subscribe if you were disappointed by Cyberpunk's character creation, because oh Nelly. Although Cyberpunk has been trying to make up for its initial flop with patches and the new DLC, it's still undeniable that its original release was a huge betrayal of people's expectations. The most frequently lamented part of Cyberpunk is the game-breaking bugs plaguing the streets of Night City. However, another big concern were the undelivered promises regarding the game's mechanics, one of which was the underwhelming character creator. The teasers and previews for the game boasted about character creation being an incredibly expansive and immersive experience. Everything was supposed to be customizable, from the character's body parts and cybernetics to their life path and origin story. Not only that, the changes you made would greatly impact the gameplay by unlocking new features and special dialogue options. Suffice to say then that the released version of the mechanics were severely watered down. The features were present in the game, but the appearance customization was reduced to basic sliders, and the cybernetics and lifestyle options barely made any difference, providing only a handful of minor changes to the game. It's the type of uninspired experience that no samurai would want to wake up for. Number 6, Settlement Building, Fallout 4. In 2015, Fallout 4 was one of the most discussed topics on the internet. You wouldn't be able to come across a site that wasn't talking about or hyping up the series' 4th installment in some way, except maybe your grandma's Facebook page. Forget it, she was excited about it too. One of the most frequently teased mechanics that Bethesda couldn't stop talking about was the new settlement building feature. The mechanic was supposed to allow the player to populate the barren wasteland of the Commonwealth and turn even the most desolate junkyard into a vital part of the region's community. However, as is usually the case with Todd Howard's sweet little lies, the end product left much to be desired. Though the system would allow you to populate select parts of the Commonwealth, the building mechanics were very limited. You only had a few building materials at your disposal, and each building location had a restrictive limit on the number of objects you could place. Not to mention the members of your new community were all generic lifeless settlers with hobbies like clipping through walls and refusing to follow basic pathfinding. You know, in other words, they were your typical Bethesda NPCs. Number 5, 256 endings until dawn. Every time a new major supermassive release comes out, the same bold claim begins to circulate on the internet. The game includes a ridiculously high number of endings. The Quarry supposedly has 186, and Supermassive's original horror title Until Dawn has 256. But is that really true? Well, anyone who's played these games can tell you with full confidence and frustration, no. There are only actually 3 distinct endings, one for saving everyone, one for letting everyone die, and one for saving some people. The big numbers actually refer to the combinations of choices that can lead to these endings, but these combinations don't actually impact anything at all, as each survivor responds in the same exact way to their companion's survival or deaths, regardless of how many or how little you manage to save. The hype surrounding Supermassive's endings is not only misleading, it also makes for a really disappointing experience if you decide to replay either one of their major releases. This is just the same thing that happened last time. Number 4, going full open world, Dragon Age Inquisition. Dragon Age is a series that changes themes more frequently than some people change their bed sheets. I'm looking at you, when was the last time you did it? Starting off as a classic RPG with a slightly low fantasy angle, it transformed into an open world high fantasy experience that is supposedly going to add God of War style combat in the next installment, Dreadwolf. But for now, let's talk about the shift towards open world gameplay, mainly how it turned out to be a lot less fun than it should have been. Before Dragon Age Inquisition was released, many of the series fans were quite excited by BioWare's announcement of adding open world exploration to the title, finding new exciting places to visit and discovering more about the famous regions in the game. Unfortunately, the open world ended up being the weakest part of Inquisition. The explorable regions were barely populated by anything, and aside from a few landmarks here and there, the landscape looked generic and boring. It felt like the maps were put there to pad the game's runtime more than anything, preventing you from reaching the actually fun story parts of Inquisition. Number 3, randomized galaxy, No Man's Sky. In terms of level of uncontained hype and the global disappointment that followed, No Man's Sky is easily up there with Cyberpunk 2077. Admittedly, the game has been releasing frequent updates over the years that majorly improve the experience, but it's still nowhere near the potential that everyone expected that it would have. Before its underwhelming release, No Man's Sky was seen as one of the most ambitious open world projects, in large part thanks to the promised mechanics that were supposed to create a unique, one-of-a-kind galaxy for each and every player. Every solar system, moon, and planet was supposed to be randomly generated, starting with the basics like planet shapes and locations, and ending with more specific parts like flora and fauna. To say this didn't happen would be a big understatement. No Man's Sky's random generation actually turned out to be procedural, and pretty terrible procedural at that. The planets all looked identical, barren and generic, and the animals resembled improperly assembled Lego characters rather than actual creatures. Instead of a boundless galaxy to explore, No Man's Sky ended up being a repetitive trek through some empty dirt patches with an occasional abomination of nature to laugh and or cry about. Number 2, the morality system, Fable. Over the years, Peter Molyneux, the creator of Black and White and the Fable series, has gained a reputation as an overselling con man within the gaming community. His notoriety can mostly be attributed to his exaggerated promises of Fable's hyper-advanced mechanics. If you were to trust Molyneux's words back in 2004, just like many other excited gamers did, Fable would have felt like an almost lifelike experience. The game was going to let you live out your character's life in its entirety, have children with your spouse, and have its world evolve right before your eyes, as showcased by Molyneux's infamous example of a tiny acorn growing into a tree. But did any of that actually end up in Fable? No, of course not. The game included none of the above mentioned mechanics, and those that were present felt basic and gimmicky at best. Now, the game was still fun, of course, but when the producer promised that you'd be able to see every wrinkle appearing on your character's face in real time, and all you got was a bunch of lazy time skips and pre-rendered models, it's hard not to feel disappointed. And number 1, species evolution, Spore. The lost potential of the god simulator Spore is one of the greatest disappointments in gaming history. The number of projects like Species and Thrive that try to revive Will Wright's original vision of Spore should be a good testament to that. During the early development of Spore in 2004 and 2005, the game was going in a completely different direction than the final product. Spore was aiming to be a more realistic experience, featuring more detailed graphics and game mechanics like additional evolution stages, more in-depth character customization, and an actual exploration of planets during the space stage. Eventually, however, a part of the development team came to the conclusion that the game would be more appealing to a wider audience if it adapted a more simplified and cartoonish approach to life simulation in a similar vein to Max's hit Sim series. This idea was later adapted by the rest of the developers, and Spore was turned into the watered-down, kid-friendly version of itself that became the final product. This said, the footage of the original realistic Spore has not been forgotten, and to this day many players wonder about what could have been. These mechanics were disappointments, but speaking of games that could have been, click this video on screen now to watch 10 awesome video game features we can't believe got cancelled. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Head over to WhatCulture.com for more content every day. I've been Cy for WhatCulture, and have a good week.